Hello and welcome to another episode of the UCLA Bruins Insider Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Connor Moreno, lead writer for UCLA Bruins on SI. And today we're moving on to number 3 in our series where we rank UCLA's most important games of the season. Last episode, we went ahead and talked about number 4, which was Nebraska. I think we chose Nebraska just because it was at a very crucial point in UCLA's schedule. Where, it's in between a game against Indiana, a game against Ohio State, both ranked opponents going into the season, and it's kind of in the middle of UCLA's toughest stretch of the year, which is the second half of the season, where after Ohio State and then Nebraska and Indiana, you have Washington and you have USC to close out the season. So we thought it was a pretty important game, but coincidentally, number 3 is actually going to be a game against a ranked opponent, which, earlier in the series we put Ohio State and Penn State at 10 and 9 in the rankings because they were ranked opponents, but we only put them so high because UCLA is obviously going to be heavy underdogs in those matchups. But this game against Indiana, I don't think they're going to be, too much of an underdog, especially when we see how much the season plays out for them. So I kind of just gave it away. But number 3, the number 3 most important game for UCLA's season in our rankings is Indiana. So let's get right into it. Let's go ahead and talk about them. Indiana obviously ranked 20th in the AP preseason top 25 polls. And the Bruins take on the Hoosiers after 2 weeks against Michigan State and Maryland, 2 games where UCLA will be favored. So this is another one of those games where, UCLA is potentially coming off of 2 straight wins against conference opponents. How are they going to respond? Are they going to go ahead and keep on, putting their foot on the gas pedal, or are they going to kind of just sit back and be lax and kind of just take a loss against Indiana, who they're probably going to be underdogs against? They're not going to be heavy underdogs, as I said, but, they're going to be underdogs, so how are they going to respond to that after potentially coming off of 2 wins? So take a walk with me here. UCLA opens up the season by upsetting Utah. Obviously, they're not going to be too heavy of an underdog against Utah, but, Utah's going to be a very important litmus test for them to open the season. So, UCLA opens the season upsetting Utah, and then the next week they defeat UNLV, who, by the way, UNLV barely got past Idaho State, which means now that UCLA is going to be favored in their matchup against them. So going into the season, a lot of people thought, UNLV is going to be a tough opponent for UCLA. You got Dan Mullen, you have a crazy staff. It's going to be tough for them. They're going to be feisty. It's going to be in Las Vegas. How's UCLA going to play against them? But, UNLV barely coming off a 38-31 win over a FCS school. Kind of changes that narrative a little bit. I think UCLA is going to be more favored going into that matchup, and they're going to be, I think, slight favorites is what ESPN has them as right now. But anyways, so you go into the season upsetting Utah, you defeat UNLV, you defeat New Mexico to close out non-conference play. And then you open up Big Ten play with a win against Northwestern, who you're going to be favored against in that matchup. It's going to be an away game, but you're going to be favored against Northwestern, and that's a 4-0 start. I've been talking about it for a lot in this series. So you have that 4-0 start, and then you go up against Penn State the next week after Northwestern. That's going to be a loss. We'll go ahead and put that in pencil, potentially in pen. So then after that, you go ahead and turn around and play against Michigan State, who you're favored against, and then after that, you play against Maryland, who you're favored against. That is a very likely path for UCLA to start 6-1 this season going into their matchup against Indiana. I think it's realistic. I'm going to write about it today. You're going to be the day you're listening to this, you'll see something up on UCLA Bruins on SI. It's a column where I'm going to talk about how I think UCLA can start 4-0 and even potentially stretch that start to 6-1 with that only loss being against Penn State. So yeah, I think there is a realistic path that going into this Indiana game, UCLA has a 6-1 record and they're really coming into form towards the middle of the season, and they play against Indiana, where, Indiana's still going to be pretty good at that point in the season. So I think it's going to be a really good clash, and it's going to be a really good test for UCLA to continue setting that tone for the rest of the season going into their toughest stretch of the year following the Indiana game. I would say that Indiana marks UCLA's the beginning of UCLA's kind of gauntlet stretch, I'm going to call it. UCLA's gauntlet stretch going into the end of the season where, and let me pull up the schedule real quick, just so that way I'm 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure I have it memorized because this is all I've been talking about for the last 2 weeks. Let me just pull it up. Yeah, so you have Indiana, and then you have Nebraska, and then you have Ohio State, and then you have Washington, and then you close out the season with USC. So I think, after that pretty favorable start, I think we're underrating how potentially favorable UCLA's start is to this season. After that pretty favorable start, I would like to think that Indiana marks the beginning of a very tough stretch to close out the season. So, which is why, not only is this game important, but games before that are pretty important because depending on how you start the season, you're either going into this game against Indiana pretty confident and being 1 win away from maybe 7 or 8 wins, or you're going into this game, if you started the season poorly, in desperation mode because you have a ton of quality opponents ahead of you. UCLA is not going to be favored in many of their final 5 games. Indiana, no. Nebraska, maybe. Ohio State, definitely not. Washington, probably going to be slight favorites over Washington. I think I have them over Washington. USC, probably not going to be favored against them to close out the season. So that's why I think Indiana is UCLA's third most important game this season because, it's hard to rank it because this ranking I have for Indiana's game is really hingent upon how they start the season. But I think it makes sense because regardless of where they start the season, regardless of how they start the season, whether it be 6-1, like I'm not projecting them to be 6-1, but like I said, 6-1 is a realistic start. Whether they start 6-1 or whether they drop a few games and they're like 3-4. Imagine if they're 3-4 going into this Indiana game. That's why this game is so important because no matter how you start, the game against Indiana is the official beginning of what I think is their most difficult stretch of the season. So we typically read what an analyst has to say about a team, but I actually kind of talked a lot about it, and we're running out of time, so I'm not gonna do that for Indiana. We might do it for tomorrow's, which is number 2 on the rankings. But yeah, Indiana ranked 20th going into the season, depending on where UCLA is. At that point in the season, it might be a really, really good Big Ten game. But that's all dependent on how UCLA starts. And I think that they do have the potential to start pretty well. And there is potential for this matchup against Indiana to be a really important game. Not only a really important game, but a really good competitive game to watch if UCLA is the team that we all think they're going to be. So yeah, that was number 3, Indiana. Tomorrow we'll come back with number 2, and then finally in a few days we will close out this series with number 1. I do like number 1. I think number 1 was really the catalyst of making this series. So anyways, yeah, we'll go ahead and see you tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to the UCLA Bruins Insider Podcast. We'll see you tomorrow.